Okay, so let's continue with our with our Python interview question. So the question is, what is mocking, and explain with an example. So this is very important interview question, and not from the interview point of view, but like from like day-to-day life point of view. Well, if you are working in some project, right? So what is mocking? So mocking is to modify the code during the runtime, right? So I am saying mocking is to modify the code during the runtime. But now you can question, okay, how this is possible actually? Because if I write the code and if I run that code using Python command, how can I modify that code during the runtime? So as an example, so if I go here and if I create some file sample.py file, and if I create some function add numbers a comma b, and if I return a plus c, and if I create another function subtract, and it also return a minus b, and if I call this number add number 10 comma 5 and print it, right? And if I run this, 1 second, so Python source sample, and if I run this, we are getting the 15, right? So I am running the code. So how can I modify? All right, but mocking said is to modify the code during the runtime. So I run the code and it is calling the same function. How can I modify? So modify means if I want instead of the add number, I should call the add number, but the functionality should be call of the subtract number. How it could possible? So you can say, okay, instead of the add number, you can mention subtract number. But no, I said I have to call the add number, but the functionality should be subtract number. So what I can do is add number is equal to subtract number. Right. So what I said is, okay, assign the subtract number to the add number. If I run this, now I am getting the answer as a 5. 10 minus 5 is equal to 5. So basically, during the runtime, I like modify the functionality of the code. So this is not an actually mocking. The mocking concept will be come into the picture when we are running the test cases. So this is not actually the mocking. All right. So let me delete this file to avoid any confusion. Okay. So mocking I said to modify the code during the runtime. Okay. So it is generally to replace the part of the code with fake object. So we replace the part of the code. I said we just see instead of the add number, we put the subtract number. Right. So but it is generally used during the testing. So as an example, because here I mentioned it is used during the testing to avoid external dependency. So give me the example. So example is, so let's suppose you write some code which is hitting some API, HTTP request API, and that API is hosted at some other server. All right. Now you will run your code and it is going to run fine. All right. So let's write my code first. So here I write the code. I am hitting some fake API. So fake API, you can get that API. So if you go to the Google fake REST API, fake JSON API. So if you click on it, the first things you will get, and here you will get so many URLs /post slash one, and if you hit it, so you will get the URL. I am using this URL, right? So this is a API hosted by someone, and we are using that. All right. So this is the URL. So if I have to write the code, just we have to use the request, and we are doing request.get. We are getting the response, and we are handling the exception as well. And we are calling the function, and we are just printing what is the status code and what is the JSON. So let's run our code. So Python source request.get. So we are getting our output. Why we are seeing in some beautiful format? Because we instead of the print, we are using the pretty print. So p print. If you don't want to use the p print, so which is also fine, but you will see the output in such a way, not in the beautiful format. So that's why I use the p print so that it is easy to read. Okay, so if I run this, now we are getting the output, which is perfectly fine. Okay, so this is I said. So let's go to the I said if we have our code which makes the APP request to some API. Yes, we have our code which is making the HTTP request or HTTPS request to the external API. Yes. Okay, what next? So, but how you are going to write the test cases? So now you can question, okay, that writing the test case is very simple. But what we can do is we can create a test folder, we can create a file test underscore request. We can come here and we can import whatever the function we want to test. We can just import. So we are importing from source folder from the particular file. We are importing get post and we are hitting the URL test get post and we have to hit that URL and we'll get some response and we are checking if the response status code is 200 or not, or if the user ID is equal to 1 or not, if the title is equal to this or not. So where is my pie chart? Yeah. So we are just checking. So if I run this, so what happened? 1 minute. So if I run this, something happen 1 minute. I test minus V. So if I run this, it runs fine. All right. So now you said like the code is perfectly run fine. We are just calling the function and we are asserting whether the values are getting like expected value and the return value, actual value are equal or not. So we are asserting. So why should we use mocking? But if you see the whatever the test case we have written, it is hitting the external API. If I switch my Wi-Fi off, or if my disconnect my internet connection, this is going to be fail because there is no internet connection, and if there is no internet connection, it can't reach to the like external server, and we will get some error. Definitely, we are going to get some error. All right. Then how can I avoid this question like this scenario? So that's why I mentioned mocking is generally used during the testing to avoid external dependency. External dependency means like this way in our code there is an external dependency because we are hitting that, though here we are not getting request.get but we are calling this function, and this function has the external dependency. When we have to write the code, we have to write the code in such a way so that there should not be an external dependency. Unit means test a particular function only. We are not going to touch any external database or external server connection or even external other microservices. All right. So how we are going to do that? So the answer is we have to mock. But what we have to mock? So the function which is creating the problem, that we have to mock. So the which function creating the problem? So we are calling the get post. Okay. So the get post is calling here. So now it will come here request dot get. So this function is creating the problem, right? Request dot get. Other thing is not creating the problem because if this function, even this part only request dot get, this creating the problem because if whatever the response we get, we are just returning the response. The return is not a problem. This variable is not a problem. This part only request dot get is a problem. So but now what we have to do is I need to mock this. I need to mock this. Mock means I have to write something in my unit test. If if you are going to call this thing, right? Right? If you are going to call this thing, then return this response. So I have to hard code the response. The same thing I mentioned. Uh, we can mock the API request so that the code does not actually call the API, but returns the predefined or predetermined responses. Right? So you make the code, you make the HTTP request call, but now during the unit test cases or during our testing, we have we can mock the API request so that the code does not actually call the API, right? And it should return the predetermined responses. Okay, so how we can do that? So generally people get confused like how we can do that. They know what is mocking, which is perfectly fine. They get confused because in the on the internet there are so many libraries. There are like a unit test mock library. There is a mock library. There is a PyTest mock library. There is a mocker library. There is a magic mock library. So many libraries. There is a like some people use patch as well. Like so even I also get confused like where to use when if there is a one standard, right? If there is a one standard and if that standard is going to work in my each and every scenario, then I why should I like even use the other things which is going to confuse me, right? So the answer is simple. Like what I use is like you can use anything else. All right. So what I use is I use the unit test dot mock library. So let me uncomment this because we have to mock that. And why I use unittest.mock from import, even though the test is written into the PyTest only, but the mock functionality I am calling from the unit test. Why? You can use from the mock library as well, from mock, import mock, it's same only, right? But if you use this mock library, then you have to install this library mock, because mock is the third party library. So I don't want to install, I don't want to unnecessarily depend on my third library packages. Within the Python there is a unit test library, and Python is already installed. So within the Python, and we already have the unit test library, so why can't I use that library? Because I have to call this class mock only, so I can, like, why can't I access that class? So it doesn't mean I am like writing the test case in the unit test, right? So test is still in the PyTest only, because I am running using the PyTest command. So if you see here, I run PyTest minus v, I did not run unit test, right? So we have to mock that. Now the thing is, what we have to mock. So we have to mock request dot get. So instead of this thing, whenever we are calling request dot get, so as soon as the code reaches this state, I have to return something. I have to return something, right? So what I said, whenever this object, so in our actual code, whenever this run, it returns some like a object. So if you print this, print response and dir of response, if I run my actual code, so right now I'm running my actual code only, because to understand this is very important. So 1 minute, cd mocking, cd source and request, cd source, so Python request. All right. So if you see here, response is 200. So this is an object. So if you do type of response, you type of response. So if you see here, it is a class. It is a class. It is a class of request type. It is a class of request type. And that class has so many attributes. All right. So the one attribute is JSON. One attribute is like a status code, and so many other attributes. So currently we are using only dot status code and the JSON only. All right. So now 1 minute. So clear. Yeah. So come outside. Now I have to mock this request dot get. All right. So what I have to do is I have to mock this. So let's create the fixture. Let's create the fixture. So PyTest fixture. So PyTest fixture is like we can use like in most of the functions, right? Because if at other places we are using request.get, and if I want to use the same thing, so we can use that. All right. So to use the PyTest fixture, we have to use the import library. So hopefully, like I am not explaining what is PyTest and what is PyTest.fixture, because I am considering we already know that. Okay, so I was thinking, hopefully, like we know what is PyTest fixture. If we don't know, that is still okay. So PyTest fixture is like just like to use the same functionality again and again. So because here we are using the PyTest, so I created PyTest, I imported the PyTest. So now I have to write the PyTest fixture. All right. So let's create one function, def contest. All right. So let's create one function. Okay. So I write this function, def context, monkey, just def context. Just don't confuse with this like monkey patch keyword. And we use here pytest dot fixture. All right. And whatever do the mocking, we are going to mocking here. But how this function is going to know, like I have to like call whatever the mock, because whatever the mock operation we are going to perform, we are going to perform in this. But we have to call this function. But how this function is going to know, like I have to like some mocking is happening here. So what I have to do is I have to call this context here. So if I do this context here, it is going to call this function def context. Okay. So that's why like we pass here context function. Okay. Now what next? Because we just use here, we imported the mock library, but we have not used it. So what I said is, wherever request.get is being used, I have to mock with something, right? So the line which I have to use is always this one. One second, Control Z. So I have to use this line. So what I'm doing is monkey patch dot set attribute. So even if you Google it, so let's go to the Google monkey patch set attribute, and if you go here, monkey patch like monkey patch is very small like a library, all right? So it has like only these kind of functions: set attribute, delete attribute, set item, set environment. So set environment, delete environment means like when you have to mock some environment variable, so you have to set those environment variables, like. And similarly like set attribute and object name value raising true. So set attribute, if you click here, set attribute, so set attribute value on target memorizing the old value. So here, whatever like uh, the value we have to like mock, or you can say basically we have to replace this value. That's it. So we have to use the monkey patch. So I said, because what I have to replace, I have to replace this request.get, and where the request.get is. So how this code is know where the request.get is. So the request.get is in the source folder under the request code, and then there is a request, and then there is a get. So whenever it see this line, it see this line means like a request.get operation. It, instead of this, it is going to use something else. So I said it should use my mock operation, mock get operation, right? Mock operation, mock get. Because if you go to my document, so I said when we replace the part of the code with some fake objects, that is called the mock. That is called the mock. And same thing we are doing here. So we are replacing the some part of the code, we are replacing the some part of the code with something, and that something is called the mock objects. That is the fake object, mock get. So we mentioned some variable mock get. That is fine. Hopefully you understand now. All right. Now we have to return this. We have to return yeah, like return this. Okay. So we are returning this. But but if you see here, we are getting some error mock get, because mock get is not defined. But how it's going to know? We just mentioned like some variable ABC. How it is going? Because I said we have to define some predefined responses. Predefined responses means if you go to the code, okay, we said okay, return instead of request dot get. Here we are getting response. So instead of this response, we should get something. We should get something. Okay, we are getting something. We are getting something. Yes, we are getting something, but currently this is empty. This is nothing. All right. But if you see here, this response has this response is a class object. This response is a class object, and this response has so many attributes. So the same attributes we need to attach with the mock object as well. All right, because we have to mock. So mock means do the same thing, because we said okay, instead of the request dot get, here we are getting response. So instead of the request dot get, I will get some mock response. All right, so I will get some mock response. So I mentioned here, but currently if I do dir of mock get, this is nothing, this is empty, because I did not define anything. But here, if I get some response, it is the type of class. It is a type of class. So I think is, so instead of this variable, it should be of some class type. And here it is of request class. All right. So if I run this code, Python source, one second, Python source, request.get. So here you should say the object which we are getting is of class type, class request type, right? And we are and this response is 200, which is fine, and it has so many attributes. Now we say instead of the request dot get, we should get this mock get, but here mock get is nothing, mock get is empty. So what we have to do is because we have to mock in the same way, so mock get should be of some class type, and that class should be mock class, right? That class should be mock class. So now we have to define the mock as well. So we will do line by line only. So now we define the mock get. Okay. So mock get is of class mock, and mock we already imported. So mock is a class. So class mock. So if we don't define anything, then it is fine, right? Okay. We said okay, it is of class type because here we define it's a class. Now mock. So here if you go here now mock get is a class. So this part is done. This part is perfectly done. All right. But but where are these? Because this has so many attributes. But this is an empty class. This is empty class. Whatever the class, it has this class has their own attributes, right? This class has their own attributes. But this class doesn't have the JSON attribute, doesn't have the status code attribute, doesn't have anything. All right. So this doesn't have anything. So we have to attach those attribute with this class because this class has some attribute this because this class is defined by someone else, and when they have defined this class that class has some attribute because if I place the cursor you see it has like class spec text side effect, so it's a side effect, return value, wraps, name. So it has so many attributes, right? It has so many attributes, but it doesn't have those attributes which we need because we need the same attribute because the same attributes like JSON, links, okay, next, we need all these kind of attributes. So what we have to do, we define the class type. Now what we have to do, we said when this class will be defined now, so there is a default attribute return value. Return value means what we need return, what we want to return. All right. So we want to return the mock object only. So we want to return the mock object. We want to return the mock object. So we define some mock object. All right. So we define some mock object. All right. So we define some mock object. Okay. So we define some mock object. But that object, this object has nothing attached. This object doesn't have any attribute. What all attributes we need? We need status code. So this object has status code. We need JSON. So we are saying okay mock response dot status code. We are assigning this doesn't have any inbuilt value, and as per the code we said it should return the predetermined response. So we are saying okay we want 200 as a status code. We like JSON is a function. JSON is a function. So here we are saying like lambda function, or even you can like create some function as well, which is like anything you want to do. So here we am doing lambda function. So that function when I do JSON, it is returning with this thing. It is returning with this thing. So the whole thing I defined in some other file, examples.py files. So in the example.py file, I define the whole thing user ID so in some variable get post response. And here I import this. I import that response from examples get post response. And here I am using this. So what I'm saying is I am mocking everything. So first I have to mock what I am calling. I have to mock with something, which is perfectly fine. Now that something should be some like that should be some class because here it is a class. Okay, so now I make it class. Okay, which is perfectly fine. That class should return something and that should have some attributes attached. So that is returning some mock object because that is a mock object, and that object because class is going to return some object. All right, so class is going to return some object. So this is a class. This is a class. Class is going to return some object. All right, so this is the mock object. So we created some mock object, and that object has some attribute. So we set those attributes. That's it. So now, if you run this code, so it is going to run fine. So clear by test minus v. So now our test has been passed. So now you may question. So it could be going to the internet because my internet is running. So to verify what I can do is I can print mock response and I can print dir of mock response. So just to check whether that function is being called or not. So pytest minus v minus rp. So you could see I am why there are two type. I'm running two times print, one print. Okay, so here you could see I am getting my response. I'm getting my response. So this is the mock object. This is of class type, and you could see it has now some extra attribute JSON and status code. Status code by default it doesn't have any attribute. If you do print mock response and dir of mock response, by default it doesn't have any attribute. So if I run it, so if you scroll up, see by default it doesn't have any kind of attribute. It doesn't have any JSON. So this is the by default response, which I just highlighted. By default, it doesn't have any status. By default, it doesn't have any. Because that class, whoever is written that class should have some attribute. That is those attributes. But what attributes we need? We need JSON, we need status code, or maybe if you are using something else in your code, then definitely you need those as well. All right. So, but currently we are using status code and JSON. So we define status code and the JSON as well. So now we define with the object. So we have JSON and the status code as an attribute. All right. So let me remove this print statement. Let me remove this print statement. Okay. So now our work is done. Our work is done. But if you run the PyTest coverage command, na. So let me run the PyTest coverage command. PyTest coverage command. So now the coverage command has been done. So it will create the HTML coverage folder, and there is a file index.html file. And if I uh, open in Explorer, open in browser, and use the same browser Edge. So you could see if you click on it, this red part is not covered. This red part because we covered positive scenario. We have not covered negative scenario. So how to cover the negative scenario? So let's write that code. How to cover negative scenario. So now, because here we are saying return value should be some positive, some value. So right. So now instead of returning some positive value, we need to return some exception. Because if the exception is being returned, then only this code is being covered. So how to do that? So let's create one more PyTest picture. All right. So context exception and monkey patch. So same thing. What we have to mock? We have to mock this thing. So what is this mock get? Mock get should be of class type. And what it's going to return? So it's going to return some object, right? But here, so whenever you want to raise some exception now, so there is a keyword side effect. Even if you search on Google, mock side effect, and you go to the unittest.mock and search here side effect. Side effect. So it says side effects allow you to perform side effects, including raising an exception. So when you have to raise an exception, then you should not use the return value. You have to use the side effect. So here we are using side effect. And what should be the side effect? I have to raise the exception. That's it. And I have to raise the exception. All right. So I don't even need this mock response. Right, because this class, as soon as this class being called, I have to just add the exception. I don't need any object, and that I don't need any object attribute because I have to just add the exception. Right. So now I have to write my another test case to handle the negative case scenario. Okay, now in within the PyTest, how to write that with PyTest.raises. So I want to raise the exception, and the exception should match this particular error code, error occurred during get operation. It should match, and I will get this URL. Okay, so now, oh sorry, we are PyTest minus v. So our both the test case has been passed. So now if you run the code, so our report has been generated. So now go to the previous and refresh it. So now you could see our report has been generated. So earlier there is 64. Now you could see they all are green. Only this part is showing red because we have not covered this code, but the main code we have covered. That's why it is showing green. All right. And one more thing, because here I have created the dot coverage RC file. So okay, once no, not the coverage, but the coverage RC file. So if I just remove this, or maybe just remove everything. All right, and if I run this and if I refresh it, so now you could see I am getting the ini.py as well. Though ini.py is the empty, so I have to exclude those. So to exclude those, you have to create the coverage.rc file, and you have to omit that particular file. So I said whatever the init like ini.py file, just omit that. So now if you run it, and now if you refresh it, so that init.py file is not like being calculated in your coverage. All right. So here the main thing is how we have to mock. So in the coming video now, so I am going to create the next video how to mock the Boto 3 operation, because just by looking this example, just by looking, even though we covered everything, like we line by line we covered the return value as well, we covered the side effect as well, and we covered the positive scenario, we covered the negative scenario, and we see how to use the mocking as well. All right, and we can even like use this code as well, which is in the one line, but this is like a very confusing, because inside of mock you are using the mock, so that's why you can use that code as well, but I am not going to use. To explain this, I designed the code in such a way so that it is very clearly what we are doing. So that's why I started from the reverse. Okay, I have to mock this. What is this? It should be the class, and what that class should return, that class should return some object. Okay, let's create that object, and that object should some attributes. Okay, let's create that attribute. That's it. That's okay. So in the coming video, we are going to mock the Boto 3 operation to understand the mocking concept clearly. And in the coming video, you will see I am going to use the same unit.mock class to mock everything. Whatever the function you are going to give, I am going to use only this one method. I'm not going to use the patch method. I'm not going to use magic mode. I'm not going to use anything else. So only one thing which will be useful for everything, which we can mock anything. Okay. So I will push this code to my GitHub repo if you want to use that. So that's it. That's the end of the video. Thank you.